Welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast for Friday, the 17th of February, 2023. The topic of today is going to be fifth generational warfare, trying to separate between myths and common mistakes, referencing it, and also including an attempt to define what we mean when we talk about fifth generational warfare. Now, conveniently, and if the criticism were to start, this may come across as a hammer seeing only nails, but in some sense, I am going to make the claim that fifth generational warfare, the question of what we're referring to as fifth generational warfare, is perpetually in a question of definition. It has to answer a series of questions before we can kind of move forward on the subject. And I'll make the claim that we are going to be forced to choose whether it is deliberate or timeless, which is kind of an interesting problem. Before we get into the subject on fifth generational warfare, I'm going to bring up in the background, for those who are watching on YouTube, a little bit of our website. So if you are familiar with the homepage of our website, you may notice that there are some things appearing on it, and that is all I can say there. More importantly, the skate decks are in the process of we're ironing out the final details. Things like, how are we going to figure out how many sizes are we going to be able to limit it? Are we going to have to limit it? How many are going to come out? Chances are we're going to do a limited run, but it is a pre-order function right now. So if we extend past what we were expecting, more the merrier. So that's kind of the idea. We need to get a minimum of, I think, 60 to make it worth it. And so the question being is, if we get less than 60, they're still going to get delivered. But if we get more than 60, then there's going to be if we get more than 60, that's kind of this weird threshold when it comes to manufacturing as to what is going to be, I guess, in essence, worth it for the Firearms Policy Coalition to receive our donation of any meaningful value. So we're going to do what we can. But if you are interested in a skate deck, or if you're interested in supporting the show, if you're interested in supporting the skate or getting a skate deck, whether you can use it for decoration or simply to help in this push against what could be arguably a form of an application within fifth generational warfare to demoralize the population through disarmament. The skate decks, I believe we are scheduling them to go live a week from today. That would be something like Friday the 20. Wouldn't that be if today's the 17th, it'd be Friday the 25th. Might as well look at the camera. Friday the 24th. Don't ask me to do math on camera. It's just a bad idea. I'll quote you Socrates, but I'm not going to try to do math. The other thing is that on Wednesday we announced that we were releasing or opening up a what is it called? A Subscribestar page. Now the question that we're looking at is, Subscribestar seems to have claimed that there is a lot of people trying to open up pages for themselves, and so they can only approve so many at a time. Conveniently, we have a locals page that has already been up and standing for a while. At this point in time, we are going to make the executive decision, despite what you may hear in the next couple of podcasts, because they were recorded before this one, that we are going to stick to a locals platform, especially based on who owns it. I am less concerned about being censored over there, although I'm not particularly concerned about it as much as I could be. I think that we're wiser than it. We can beat that game. So if you want to head over to if you want to head over to locals.com, and then that's going to be /redacted. I think it's redacted LLC right now. That is where you can find our page. There's very little content on it. And the question is going to be, what is it for? Two causes. First cause is going to be to support the page. It's to support the show, to give us the opportunity to continue producing the content that we do, to focus on the philosophy of violence and how we think about the things that we that really do contain or have relevance to our lives. And then also that will get you included in the operations. And what I mean by the operations is, if you were around for season 1, Operation 1, or if you've ordered something from us before we launched season 1, Operation 1, you may have received a postcard. And this is kind of a hint of what it may look like. But that is all I can say. The rest is for you to figure out. If you have a if you are a supporter of us on locals, I will send you a postcard. If you have purchased something from the store at any time, I will send you a postcard. You will then be immediately inducted into the process of an operation. Special thing I like to do with you guys. So, moving on. Moving on. That's a 5-minute introduction. I apologize for dragging your feet through all of that, but we had to get details taken care of. All right. Fifth generational warfare. Why am I bringing this up? What's the relevancy of the term? What does it even mean? One, first of all, it seems to re-enter into our current milieu, our current social environment more often than, or quite frequently as of late, whether it's through politicos like Tim Pool or Jack Posobiec, or whether it's through sort of the intel chain, the people like S2 Underground, or the kind of, I wouldn't say it's not really the preparedness, but more like the intel focused people of like in some are SIGINT, human intelligence, signal intelligence. I wouldn't say it's communities, but subsections of who we are. This term fifth generational warfare tends to reappear and reappear and reappear, and sometimes it is used as an explanation for perhaps the general chaos that just seems to be going on in the world around us. And so that general chaos, the madness of the world, we could look at exactly what happened in the last week or so. The while while the chemical spill fire thing in Ohio didn't happen this week, it happened before. This week, it really hit the public sector, the public conversation, the public zeitgeist of sorts. It really hit the public eye in this great criticism or question against the Biden presidency / regime. So that's one example of questions of why is it that we see multiple episodes of breaking down of complex structures. I think that's how Jack Posobiec would have addressed it lately. Why is it that we're looking at what seems like what looks like seemingly unconnected collapses, catastrophes, or breakdowns of industrial and logistical chains, such as supply chains? Why is that happening at the same time that a supposed avian flu is forcing chicken manufacturing or chicken farms, whatever, to cull the chickens? And why is that happening at the same time we're seeing, transgenderism be pushed aggressively on small young children? And why is it that we're seeing all of these things happen at the same time that they seem to be all pointing to destroying, attacking, collapsing the West or something like that? Why is it that we're looking at all of these things that seem to happen? Why are there air balloons that could be carrying foreign spy equipment or could be carrying a payload to cause biological, destruction to the United States being sort of permitted to fly across the country? And the term fifth generational warfare is really easy to throw out there as an explanation. Oh, this is fifth generational warfare. This is what it looks like. What is fifth generational warfare? This is what it looks like. That's the way the conversation tends to go. It's not, it's and part of this is an honest humility in the sense of what we're talking about when we refer to the idea, the concept of fifth generational warfare, which is an abstract object, is we're dealing with a subject that by its very nature is difficult to describe for two reasons. One of them is because we're describing it in real time, not in retrospect. We can look back through history and describe the previous four generations versions, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 versions of warfare, because we have the benefit of hindsight. Whereas now we're trying to define what the fifth generation is while it's happening. At least that's the way that it could be argued. Another example, another way that the term fifth generational warfare is used, though, is it's sort of used in the same way that somebody engages in a monomania. Okay, why is there an economic disparity in this area? Oh, it's white supremacy. Why is there crime happening in this area? It's white supremacy. Why did somebody say that? It's white supremacy. Why is this? What why is my life not as good as yours? White supremacy. I'm using the term white supremacy, the monomania that has become white supremacy, as an example of what fifth generational warfare cannot become, should not become. If we dilute and use the term fifth generational warfare so much as that it becomes a monomania, and what I mean by a monomania is an obsession with a concept, so much so that it is used as an explanation for all things. Hint, they're lying to us. That is an intellectual failure. That is essentially an example of what I would call or what's kind of being referred to as what Yuri Bezmenov was referring to when he was talking about demoralization. And so what I mean by what I'm trying to say here is the first thing that I want to start when talking about this idea of fifth generational warfare is the warning that it cannot become we cannot leave it so loosely defined that it becomes effectively a monomania that's used generically to describe or explain away everything that happens. A conspiracy theory, what we refer to as a conspiracy theory, or what we refer to as, what would be referred to as a conspiracy theory, in a sense, struggles with reality because it uses a monomania to explain away all detractors. And that monomania is, oh, you just don't see it, or oh, they're just lying to us. And this is an intellectual failing that even if the event fact of a conspiracy exists, sort of discredits and destroys any value of said information because of the ingrained, embedded, or impregnated monomania attached to it. And that is why, and that is how, when we are engaging with ideas of, say, cultural relevance, social relevance, or political relevance, that become questions of, are people conspiring and using this activity as a smokescreen, this event as a distraction, this event as a money grabbing political move. The problem that we will face is we will ruin any intellectual capability of coming to any valuable conclusion if we allow it to be impregnated with a monomania. Fifth generational warfare is no different. Am I saying that we cannot use it? No, I'm saying it needs refinement. It needs refinement. So in order to get to the foundation of what fifth generational warfare is, we need to look at the previous four. And unfortunately, there is not a unanimous decision on what the previous four generations of warfare are. The variation really does come around in the 1900s. So the older we get, the more clear it is. The closer we're looking at generations to us, the more hazy the lines get between them, which returns to the point on how fifth generational warfare is, for one reason why fifth generational warfare is hard to define is because we're in it now. At least that's how the argument would go. So, fifth generational warfare, in my argument, is an academic or pseudo-academic approach, or it's an academically or pseudo-academically used term to reference meaningful distinctions in the application of war. Generations of warfare is an academic or pseudo-academic attempt to reference meaningful distinctions in the history and application of warfare. That this is where we'd get first generational warfare, which could be referred to as ancient warfare. This is what we think of when we think of the Greeks and the Romans, even to some extent feudal wars. This is where people would go to war with one another in that sort of conglomerate between standing armies and non-standing armies, but you would think of it as the Persians versus the Greeks. This is where we read classical history, or even all the way into the medieval and the Renaissance period. We read about wars being typically between kingdoms of some sorts, where there's examples of pitched battles between organized men, and it's a conflict of border disputes and whatever. But the primary factor that describes ancient warfare is that it's not Napoleonic. It's pre-Napoleonic is probably the best way to describe it. This kind of warfare involves all levels of the fighter, but the primary factor that describes ancient warfare is that we sort of know that there are battles, and then the battles are fought between dudes, between peoples, and that is and the format of warfare kind of incorporates, we generally think of it as before the common use of firearms, but that's sort of the defining factor in ancient warfare, is that it's a conflict between people of arms in battlefields. We think of battlefields specifically, and then that is changed by Napoleonic warfare, or what is sometimes referred to as like maneuver warfare. So Napoleonic warfare is also sometimes referred to as the first generation of warfare, but I think I would make a distinction here. You have ancient warfare, which is in its own way complex, but the complexity of it is contained within a small environment. You have armies versus castles, armies versus people. It's logistics chains and everything. It's still existing, but the first generation is ancient. The second generation, this in one explanation, the first generation of war, the first like war 1.0 is knights and horses and castles and stuff like that. War 2.0 is Napoleonic. And the reason and what Napoleonic war accomplished was and the distinction that Napoleonic war could accomplish is it could effectively um, use multiple forms of technology, including guns, cannons, horses, and logistics chains, to outmaneuver the opponent. And what I mean by outmaneuver is that you had this sort of game of movement, counter movement, movement, counter movement, movement, counter movement. So ancient warfare might have been defined by armies and formations. For example, the phalanx, the Roman version of whatever that was, I can't remember. But you had, you know, you had basically formations fighting against each other, spear walls and shields and swords and spears and the Spartans and all this kind of stuff. Warfare 2.0 was Napoleonic, where you had a lot more maneuvering, where these worked in this angle and these worked in this environment. And if I could move these to move your battle lines, and war got much larger, but then I could use mortars, I could use technology to decimate your force before or after. Maneuver warfare is a very long-standing form of warfare, because in our era, it's somewhat simplistic. What followed Napoleonic warfare was trench warfare, and this could also be the introduction of chemical and industrial war. But trench warfare, the thing that trench warfare started doing is, again, technology increased in such that whatever was the most dangerous thing before that was immediately crushed and trumped. The machine gun crushed the horse charge. The horse charge was one of the greatest tools of maneuver warfare, because if used at the right time, could turn a fleeing enemy into a crushed enemy. So, and that's one example of it. But the machine gun completely ended the value of that kind of war. And then we had, more versions of artillery increasing to include um, the use of biological and chemical warfare. Then that would be generation 3. It would be a short-lived but very impactful World War One into World War Two. But what ended with World War One, and what kind of was produced in World War Two, according to this timeline, so ancient Napoleonic trench would be air control. The nuclear bomb, as well as the ability to control the air, gave America air dominance, and this could be understood as the fourth generation of warfare. Now, then, that leads us to what is the fifth generation of warfare. The technological approach goes swords and spears to cannons and guns to machine guns and trenches and gas to airplanes and nuclear bombs. Then the question is, what is the fifth generation of warfare? And you might say it's technological. I don't need to send troops to your country. I can use code and tech and whatever to hack your platforms, to make your things stop working, to make satellites rain down from the sky or whatever. This would be an example of what might be considered fifth generational warfare by going by the technology standard. Ancient, swords and spears. Napoleonic, guns and cannons. Trench, mustard gas and machine guns, air control, nuclear bombs, and then possibly even drones. And then 5, cultural or technological. Another example of what the 5 generations of warfare could be is ancient formations. 1 is ancient formations. 2 is maneuver. 3 is air control or horizontal and vertical warfare. And then 4 is insurgency, which is what we think of when we think of Vietnam and the global war on terror. And then 5 would be what? Sociocultural. So, if we were to break this down, one theory of the 5 generations of warfare would be technological focused, ancient, swords and spears, followed by 2, Napoleonic, guns and cannons, followed by 3, trench warfare, machine guns and mustard gas, followed by 4, air control, nukes and airplanes, followed by 5, technological/cultural. This would be anything from the phone in your hand using attention deficit by TikTok or whatever, or it could also be shutting down of infrastructure through the use of technology. Where does total war come in? Another question. Another example of what the 5 generations of warfare would be on sort of on a different maybe a tactics or strategy standpoint would be 1, ancient, which is armies versus armies. 2, maneuver, armies and their subcomponents and the logistics chains versus armies. 3, air control, which would be 3-dimensional warfare in some ways. You could say we've got both what's happening on the horizontal plane and what's happening on the vertical plane, and whoever controls the air. And this would also be in a level of industrialization. 4, insurgency, which is the use of shadow campaigns, shadow wars, or the use of insurgency specifically to undermine and disrupt communities. We'll talk about that in a second. And then 5th, generational warfare is sociocultural, which is maybe break down the culture of a society and then so that they are easy to subjugate. Now, we've talked about a number of things that try to address what is or what specifically is 5th generational warfare. And why I bring it up from understanding in the sense of what I would think is the foundation of 5th generational warfare is I'll make the argument that it is almost entirely internal. The big thing about 5th generational warfare and the big question about what would be referred to as 5th generational warfare is what are the tools and what is victory? In ancient warfare, if I routed your army, if I defeated your king, then I won the war. In Napoleonic warfare, if I routed your army and made you logistically incapable of retorting, then I won the war. If I subjugated your army. In trench warfare, it was even, well, I mean, there was a lot of questions on that one, but it was sort of an extension of maneuver warfare with a change in technology. In air control, if I could put bombers over your cities, I could control your country. See nukes in Dresden. And then insurgency is that if your population was for my cause, then if I could turn your population against you, then I could claim victory. Whereas in our day and age, sociocultural, this raises the question. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes and I'm going to read a couple of books, and why I would say that the monomania element of what could be considered 4th generational warfare could either be the Trojan Horse or could be the sort of brutal reality that we're trying to put definitions into something that is going to be, or we're trying to contain something in a box that cannot be contained thusly. So first, in the day and age that we live in, the term rights gets thrown around a lot, and so Kenneth Royce, in his book Modules for Manhood, makes the statement: "You have the right to be ignorant. If you don't have a philosophy, one will be provided for you." This is under the subheading "Govern your thoughts, or they will be governed by others." R. Mitchell, in The Underground Grammarian, says, "The mind will be governed. If it finds no government within it, it will embrace whatever government offers itself from without." The argument being is if we are not attentive about what we believe, if we are not able to observe what we believe and why we believe it within the framework, if we're not attentive and we're not capable of thinking about, if we're not willing to consider how it is we think about what we think, then what we think will be ruled by somebody else. If you are not, if you do not put effort into being conscious about what you believe, then what you believe will be determined by somebody else. Then, thus, we get the historically overstated thing, I'm a free thinker. Sure, bud, I gotcha. It's a very trendy thing to say, but when you have to ask the question, what does that mean? We're faced with a much harder problem. Now, this is where we get into philosophy and culture even greater. This is why it's relevant. This is why we have this thing called the Redacted Culture Cast. This is why it matters what we think about. This is in some ways what has contributed the last 10 years of my life. And so, when we are talking about fifth generational warfare, we are trying to define something that is in its own way ambiguous. The way that fifth generational warfare is, you could say it's a war for the soul of a people. When we hear quotes like from what came from Yuri Bezmenov, that the first stage is demoralization, the second stage is, I can't remember off the top of my head. What we're looking at is that we're looking at somebody making a statement that there is a conscious effort to destroy a population's ability to observe basic reality. The question then is that true? In other words, let's break it down into its components. There is an entity, there is a being, there is a person who is consciously making an effort to produce instability in another group of people by culturally destroying their capability to observe basic reality. There is a person doing a thing to affect a people in a certain outcome. 4 parts. I think we can say with a certain amount of certainty that the outcome is certainly happening, but the outcome is not necessarily evidence that there is a conscious actor making it happen. In other words, when we're dealing with the question of fifth generational warfare, we have to be careful not applying malice to what could be described or explained by foolishness or by ignorance, I guess is another way. Never apply to malice, which could be described by stupidity or something like that. It's the not Occam's razor, but Hanlon's razor. But and so what we're dealing with when it comes to what we refer to as fifth generational warfare deals with things like something that Malcolm Nance would say. Malcolm Nance has political relevance in our day and age, and he also seems to be coming up in Twitter a lot because of what he claims to be doing in Ukraine or whatever. And this is his words on page 50. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was later elected to Congress from Georgia, replied using phrases from the QAnon cult that threatened a genocide of all liberals. He is saying that whatever it is that he is describing as the QAnon cult has threatened to genocide all liberals. And this then turns into a question of who is he talking about? Is it true? Is the statement true? And what he is arguing is that there is a set of the population who's advocating for or attempting to produce a genocide. That's no light subject. Another example of what he makes an argument of is what he's defining as this thing called Titus, or the Trump insurgency of the United States, which is kind of hilarious. But let's see. Let's see. DC. This is and how he does it is he's applying motive to people, and so, this is referring to I think followers of Donald Trump. And he says, many of his most devoted followers harbor the fantasy of being a billionaire, having a fashion model wife, and saying whatever they want, whenever they want, and not giving a damn about how people feel about it. The myth, though, is that this is only for white men and their white families. The same devotees yearn to undo the diversity of the nation because it threatens their privilege passed down from centuries of killing and enslaving people of color. So this is an example of what could be understood as fifth generational warfare. Because and instead of it being the identification of an insurgency, the deliberate use of an insurgency, what Malcolm Nance is doing is he is using the idea of an insurgency to produce a reaction in people. Insurgencies often occur when internal political disagreements between two or more established parties, this is off of page 31, two or more established parties move off the debate floor and into the streets. That's what it is. So he is, and this is again, Malcolm Nance says globally renowned expert on terrorism. I don't know who called him an expert, but they should rescind their academic capability because in like page 2, he just shows that he's not. First rule of insurgency is being able to sort between who are the fish and who are the water. And Malcolm Nance's attempt is to say that there is no such thing as fish or water. It is just whatever I accuse. And so I will make the argument that the best way of understanding fifth generational warfare, it actually comes from something from a lot older, and that would be, this is coming from Baron de Montesquieu in the opening sentence of the book, The Spirit of Laws. So fifth generational warfare and how we understand it is actually a much older concept. Laws, in their most general signification, are the necessary relations arising from the nature of things. I'm going to let that one hang in the air. Laws, in their most general signification, are the necessary relations arising from the nature of things. The spirit of laws is founded on that a law is a necessary relation. In other words, it cannot be. It does exist in all possible worlds. From that arises from the nature of things. In other words, there is an object reality, and the concept of a law can only, or the concept of a law and a law itself must arise from the necessary relation, or I'm sorry, laws in their most general signification. In other words, laws, what we understand laws, come from the nature of things. A law of gravity, it was not invented by man, but it was understood by man and then created, and then was understood by man and then described by man. And the laws between people function best when they accurately arise from the relations, from the nature of things. Laws govern best when they arise from nature. This is a classic argument for laws. And in other words, laws function best governing structures, social constructs, laws, whether overt, as in written in code and codified, or social constructs, exist best when they arise from the nature of things. Therefore, what would be considered fifth generational warfare is an attempt to go to war with how a culture arises laws from the nature of things. Fifth generational warfare, in this idea, is a war of ideologies. Going back to the generations of warfare, ancient armies, then we had the wars of armies, the concept of armies and formations, which was then moved on to complex parts, movement and counter movement. Then we had distinctions of overt versus covert. Well, I am going to war with you, or I'm not declaring that I'm going to war with you, but I'm going to attack your substations or whatever. And then we had, insurgency, which is sort of the proto-ideological or introduction of ideology, fomenting rebellion in a nation, regime change. And then we have fifth generational warfare, which rises into question. So, and fifth generational warfare is why I think people describe it as a war for the soul of a population, and why I think it comes up so often is that it's a war over what people believe and how they come to the conclusions of what they believe. Propaganda would be a thing. And so this is what makes it so muddy. And this is where I think we need to make a very, very, very important distinction. In the War of the Flea, and a lot of, well, naturally, the parent of fifth generational warfare is going to come from insurgency. And this is what a very classical text by Robert Tabor claims about the goal of the guerrilla fighter, which is the proto goal of, or is the goal of what an insurgency would be. And he makes a statement on page 12. His primary goal, referring to the guerrilla fighter, his primary goal is to raise the level of revolutionary anticipation and then of popular participation to the crisis point at which the revolution becomes general throughout the country and the people and their masses carry out the final task. Think 2020. Uh so the guerrilla, his primary goal is to raise the level of revolutionary anticipation and then of popular participation. In other words, it's the goal of the guerrilla is to make the people anticipate an oncoming revolution and then support it. That is Robert Tabor in The War of the Flea on page 12. Another example would be from Counterinsurgency by David Kilcullen. I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong because he's Australian. He was Australian, and I should have written the note. I should have written this in, so I'm going to let that one go. But I'm pretty sure it's counterinsurgency, coming coming to grips with the deepening of war. Let's see. Thus, early in 2006, the U.S. military was going through a concentrated period of adaptation and change. A group of intelligent and combat experienced junior officers was working quietly to change the way that the military organizations thought and operated. The older generation was applying insights insights its members had gained before the war into new conditions. Some of these officers were informally allied with enlightened senior commanders, and some worked in concert with small groups of committed civilian experts inside and outside of the government. This is sort of the rise of insurgency. In the 1950s, it was when the Rand Corporation, I think that's what it is, yep, had played a crucial role in developing classical counterinsurgency theory. So we now can start to define what are the aspects of fifth generational warfare. One aspect is its total war. This is the first, and this is a foundational necessary aspect of fifth generational warfare. One of them is that it's total war. Total war means it's against a population as well as its government. As we move through the times of war, ancient into Napoleonic, into trench, into air control, into cultural, or ancient into maneuver, into air control, into insurgency, into sociocultural, what we're looking at is a march towards less formalized war, more total war. So a single defining aspect of fifth generational warfare is it's total. It's against the entire population, whether it's using the population or it is part of the population. 2, it involves one layer. It involves one layer deeper than an infrastructure. It involves what people believe. It's literal hearts and minds in this sense. In other words, it may include ideologies and manipulate ideologies in order to produce an outcome. This is where you could see propaganda. 3, and this is the hard one. So 1 is its total. 2, it's one layer deeper than logistics. 3, so and then 3, and this is the big killer is it active? Is it deliberate? Or is it natural? The natural result of of society, I guess, is probably what I would say. And this is where we start to address the problem of the monomania. The question is, in order for it to be considered warfare, it has to be deliberate. So, the question is fifth generational warfare, in other words, a war of ideologies, being deliberately waged against a population? Are movements like Black Lives Matter a Trojan horse for are movements like QAnon, or movements like whatever you want to call it, the Tea Party, are the Trump insurgency of the United States, the The is Black Lives Matter, is Antifa, are these ideologies, is what Louis Farrakhan doing? Are these ideologies Trojan horses used to deliver a fatal blow to the population by severing their ability to understand the relations arising from the natures of things? Is in one way, fifth generational warfare is oftentimes described as or talked about a form of ideological insurgency of sorts, primarily addressing the things that where the intellectual and the spiritual, the churches, the churches, the mosques, the the metaphysics, the academics of a culture, to break down their ability to destroy or corrupt their ability to see basic reality. The question then, or key element of this, is it's a deliberate attempt to do this. I am infiltrating your academies to make your children stupid. That's what fifth generational warfare would look like according to this definition. But the necessary element of, is it deliberate? Is it an active attempt? Or, and this is where the counterpoint comes in, is it simply the natural course of multiculturalism? Is it simply that we've built a foundation that cannot stand? And this is where the gray area of fifth generational warfare resides. Is it true that our leaders are fools, or are our leaders fools because they have been infiltrated by ideological saboteurs? The question is, I don't know. I don't know. Like, there's evidence that points to ideological saboteurs who don't necessarily, or for foolish reasons, believe what they believe, have infiltrated all of our levels of academia and the church and the community and whatever. This sort of what this deliberate attempt to infiltrate the institutions which inform the mind and the soul of a population in order for them to separate themselves from reality, breaking themselves down into a corrupt issue, opening themselves up to corruption, and the primary element of it being intentional, because it does have impacts on industry and logistics and mechanics and war and skill sets. And why is America fat? These kind of questions. Is it deliberate, or is it, which is probably the much harder, much more personal question, is, have we just fallen into degradation? And I don't mean we as in all those Americans out there. I mean you in your household, in your room, in your car, in your environment, in your job, in your video games, whatever it is that your current your environment is. You listening to this now, have you collapsed and decayed? Have you allowed your mind to decay into compliance? Have I allowed me speaking into this microphone, allowed myself to decay into compliance? And that is the question. That is the ethical question that will remain on the table for the end of the week. And that is why I took time to release this later in the day, because I needed more time to sort of reflect and concern on how I wanted to talk about this, because I was going one way and idea for the weekend, and then I decided to scrap it for today because I wanted today to be on fifth generational warfare. So, is there a Trojan horse, or is it rot in your dentures? Is there a Trojan horse, or or have we built our foundation on false idols? That's probably the question. If you want to have a metaphor for explaining what I am trying to distinguish, is, when we're talking about fifth generational warfare, are we talking about a Trojan horse, a construct built by somebody else with the intent of infiltrating and destroying our society, our culture, your community, your life from the inside out? Or have we built idols for ourselves, and now we're trying to blame somebody else for what those idols have produced? Did we build the horse and then blame the Trojans? Or did the Trojans build the horse, and are they infiltrating our environments? And if the question is the latter, if it's fifth generational warfare, some people deliberately built the horse to infiltrate our solutions, our institutions, then who are they, and who are they is the first question. And who are the infiltrators? Then we're going back to insurgency. If the answer is us, if it is our own idols which have failed us, which is that's what idols do, then the question is, how then shall we live? How then shall we change our daily lives and weekly lives and what we believe and what we argue and what we think about? And I'm going to go back to that statement by Kenneth Royce, which was influential. It's actually kind of what led me to study philosophy almost 10 years ago. And that is, if we are not willing to pay attention to why we believe what we believe and how we believe it, if we are not willing to pay attention to the mechanism of our belief, then our beliefs will be determined by somebody else. And whoever that else is can't be blamed for it, I guess. If we're not willing to pay attention to how we evaluate information, the method by which we evaluate information will be determined by somebody else. So, with that ominous conclusion, there's an element of this subject that you'll find in our conversation with Isaac Botkin, which is airing next week on, well, maybe it's 2 weeks. It's a week out now. It's a little bit further, but there's a conversation we recently had with Isaac Botkin that will be talking about decentralization. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. Next week it's actually a good conversation with Nate from the Art and War podcast, or CBRN Art, and then Mike from Open Source Defense. So, without further ado, thank you for listening on this description and breakdown, and in some ways argument about what fifth generational warfare is or could be. And the answer, what is the counterpoint and what is the counter to fifth generational warfare, is paying attention to what you believe and building character. And so I think there's many people like to claim being self-aware or intelligent or whatever. It's a tough place to be. Everyone wants to be a free thinker. Sure, you do you, boo. I think what we refer to as a critical or conscious thinker in this argument, whatever you want to use the word, is somebody who is able of observing what they believe and how they came to those conclusions, and they are able to deliberately attempt to understand their own thinking, their own how they rationalize things, not just to bolster their argument, but to understand how they believe what they believe. This is then, once again, in my argument, philosophy. And so to this hammer there may be metal nails, but I could be called worse. So this has been the Redacted Culture Cast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for engaging in this question on what is fifth generational warfare. And I hope I gave some food for thought, something to work on, and something to focus on as far as I hope that you are better off for listening. And if you are, leave a like or whatever the social media platform you're listening on, whether you're following us on Instagram, thank you very much. If you've bought something from us, supported the show, thank you very much. If you want to be a part of the operations and you're not interested or you just want to support the show, you can head over to locals.com, search out Redacted Culture or Redacted LLC. You'll know it by the logo. If you can't find it, hit me up on Instagram. We'll lead us there. And that's going to be the best platform right now. If you want to become a supporter, I very much so appreciate it. Other than that, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast, and we will see you soon. Oh yeah, watch your mailbox.